I remember that night with total clarity, even after all this time. I was driving alone on that deserted road, surrounded by nothing but the darkness of the trees towering around me. That's when, out of nowhere, a headlight appeared in front of me, coming straight at me. As I got closer, I realized it was another car, and the driver started waving frantically, signaling that something seemed wrong with my vehicle. Internally, a surge of anxiety started to build up. I couldn't see anything obviously wrong, but those exaggerated gestures made me incredibly uneasy. I tried to stay calm and slow down, thinking about stopping somewhere safe to check what might be wrong. But something inside me kept telling me to just keep going, to ignore that stranger. My heart began to race as I kept my eyes firmly on the road ahead, trying to convince myself that nothing was actually wrong. Despite my growing suspicion, the idea of having a car problem and being alone on that dark road made me give in. The guy seemed so concerned, and his voice sounded so smooth and persuasive that, reluctantly, I agreed to follow him to the gas station he mentioned. As I got back into my car, I couldn't help but notice the little details that bothered me, the man's tense expression, the way he insisted, the fact that there were no other vehicles around besides ours. My stomach twisted with the feeling that something wasn't right, but the thought of being stranded on that deserted road made me ignore my instincts. Slowly, I started to follow him, keeping a safe distance. As we got closer to the station, my tension only increased. The place seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, far from any sign of civilization. Still, I kept telling myself that this was the best option at the moment. After all, what could possibly happen? When we arrived at the gas station, my heart sank at the sight of the nearly empty place, with just a small building and dim, flickering lights. The man got out of his car and began inspecting my vehicle, but the fear inside me only grew stronger. Then, he turned and invited me to get into his car, insisting it would be more comfortable while he checked out the problem. That suggestion only intensified my distrust. The gas station's atmosphere seemed to have transformed into a horror movie scene, with the lights flickering and an oppressive silence surrounding us. I quickly glanced around, looking for other cars or people, but there was nothing, just that man and me, isolated in that remote location. My stomach churned with anxiety. Something inside me was screaming that I needed to get out of there as fast as possible, but the thought of breaking down on the road and being alone left me paralyzed. Despite my reluctance, the man grew more insistent, trying harder to convince me to get into his car. He started asking questions about my trip, seemingly trying to create a false sense of familiarity and trust. But for me, it only made the discomfort worse. When I finally refused to accept his offer and said I'd rather wait in my own car, his tone shifted drastically. He became more aggressive, with an unsettling urgency in his voice. Then, I saw a cold look in his eyes, a forced smile that didn't reach behind his glasses. At that moment, the terror inside me started to grow exponentially. It was like an avalanche of fear had hit me, and I felt like I was in imminent danger. My heart raced, and my hands trembled as I searched for a way out of that situation. Instinctively, I reached for my phone, but realized there was no signal in that isolated spot. I was completely at the mercy of this strange man, in the midst of that oppressive darkness. The feeling of vulnerability mixed with a desperate urgency to escape, but I felt paralyzed, unable to act. As the fear and sense of threat became increasingly overwhelming, I knew I had to act fast. I looked around and realized that the isolated gas station had no one else nearby that I could ask for help. My heart was pounding as I started the car, trying to stay calm. The man approached with a threatening look, clearly trying to stop me from leaving. But with a final burst of effort, I managed to accelerate the vehicle and drive away from that sinister place. As soon as I hit the road, the feeling of being followed gripped me. Every sound, every shadow, seemed to heighten my panic. That gas station, which once seemed like a hopeful spot to get help, now became a symbol of terror and despair. I knew I had to find a safe place as quickly as possible, before that threat could catch up to me. My only priority was to escape that nightmare and put a safe distance between me and that man. As I drove down the deserted road, my wide eyes desperately searched for any sign of civilization, any place where I could take refuge. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I prayed that I could reach a safe place before it was too late. At that moment, the only thing that mattered was escaping that imminent danger.
I was exhausted after hours of driving on that dark road. When I finally arrived at that isolated gas station, I decided to stop, refuel, and use the bathroom. The place was eerily quiet, with only the dim lighting from the streetlights casting unsettling shadows. Despite my fatigue, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As soon as I walked into the bathroom, a sense of being watched hit me instantly. There was no one in sight, but the heavy atmosphere seemed to press down on the air around me. While I was in one of the stalls, I heard light footsteps outside. I looked under the door and saw a shadow moving slowly. My heart raced when I realized it was a woman with a very strange appearance, her eyes vacant and lost. She stood there silently, watching me through the crack in the door, her presence slicing through the air with a palpable tension. At that moment, all I wanted was to get out of there as fast as possible. Something about that woman and that isolated gas station in the middle of the night filled me with an intense sense of unease and fear of what might happen. Panic started to set in as I tried to stay calm. The woman kept watching me silently, her oppressive presence and that vacant stare terrifying me more and more. I slowly exited the stall, trying not to make any noise. She remained still, as if she was analyzing me. As I moved toward the sink to wash my hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of imminent danger. My heart was racing, and I tried to act as naturally as possible, but it was impossible not to show my fear in the face of such a strange and threatening situation. The whole time, I expected the woman to make a sudden move or say something, but she just stood there, staring at me with that deep, empty gaze. The tension was so thick it seemed to fill every corner of that dark and desolate bathroom. I knew I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible, but something kept me frozen in place, as if I was at the mercy of that frightening presence. The atmosphere grew more and more oppressive and suffocating. I knew I needed to leave, but the thought of that strange woman trying to stop me made me hesitate. Finally, I gathered the courage and left the bathroom, heading toward the gas station store, hoping to distance myself from that threatening presence. However, the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. With every step I took, it felt like that woman was following me, even though I couldn't see her. I kept looking back, afraid she was planning something. My heart raced, and my breathing became increasingly difficult as I quickened my pace, trying to escape from that environment that was becoming more oppressive and terrifying by the second. I reached the store, but the unease didn't go away. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that the woman with the empty gaze and menacing presence was still there, observing my every move. The sense of imminent danger seemed to follow me, leaving me completely tense and terrified. Finally, I reached my car, and with trembling hands, I struggled to start the engine. The fear that the strange woman might appear at any moment, maybe even hiding to catch me off guard, was almost unbearable. As soon as I managed to start the car, I floored the accelerator and got out of there as fast as possible, putting as much distance as I could between me and that dark, isolated gas station. Even as I drove down the deserted road, the sense of relief was mixed with a lingering terror. The memory of that vacant stare and the oppressive presence of that woman continued to haunt my thoughts, turning the journey into a psychological torment. All I wanted was to find a safe place where I could finally calm down and try to process everything I had just experienced. The image of that motionless figure, silently watching me in the bathroom, seemed to be glued to my mind. The tension and panic I felt in that moment wouldn't let go, making me feel as if I was still being pursued, even after escaping. That experience had shaken me deeply, leaving a mark that I knew would take a long time to fade away.
I remember that rest stop in the middle of my summer trip so clearly. The The place seemed so peaceful and safe at the time, with the sun shining brightly over the parked cars. But as I stepped out of the bathroom, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine when I noticed a car parked right next to mine. There was no sign of anyone around, just that lone vehicle. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and hurried towards my car, but I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort. Something about the situation felt off, like there was an invisible presence watching me. Even though I couldn't explain it rationally, that seemingly innocent scene had stirred up a sense of unease in me that I just couldn't shake. As I got closer to my car, a sudden movement on the side caught my eye. To my horror, I saw a man sitting inside the car next to mine, the window slightly cracked open. His pale face was turned directly towards me, his eyes locked onto mine. That cold, piercing stare froze me in place, sending shivers down my spine. My gut immediately told me something was seriously wrong, but I forced myself to keep moving, trying to ignore the growing dread that was taking over me. When I finally reached my car, the man slowly and deliberately stepped out of his vehicle. He then started to walk around my car, his presence almost suffocating. My heart was pounding with every step he took, the sense of imminent danger growing more intense. At that moment, a deep sense of dread washed over me, and all I could think about was getting out of there as fast as possible. With every circle that man made around my car, the tension became almost unbearable. His movements were calm and deliberate, as if he was studying me, analyzing my every move. That feeling of being watched was overwhelming, making my heart race with fear. I was terrified that he might attack at any moment. As the man moved to the opposite side of the car, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if he was waiting for me? What if he somehow knew I was there, just waiting for the right moment to act? A chill ran through my body, and it felt like a dark shadow was hanging over me. I couldn't think of anything except getting out of there as quickly as possible, but something held me back from making any sudden moves that might catch his attention. In that moment, all I could do was try to control my breathing and pray that this mysterious and threatening man would just leave and let me be. As the man disappeared behind my car, the sense of impending danger became overwhelming. My brain seemed to short-circuit, and for a moment, I even struggled to remember how to start the car. The thought that this guy might be armed or had some sinister plan paralyzed me with fear. In a desperate burst of energy, I finally managed to start the car and speed away, feeling a wave of relief mixed with sheer panic. I couldn't stop thinking about what that man might have been planning, whether he was following me or had some kind of trap ready. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and all I wanted was to put as much distance between us as possible. As I sped down the road, my heart was racing, and my mind kept replaying every tense moment of that scary encounter at the rest stop. I had never felt so vulnerable and threatened in a place that was supposed to be safe and peaceful. That sense of violation and uncertainty about the stranger's intentions would haunt me for a long time. Even after leaving that awful rest stop far behind, the fear just wouldn't go away. Every car that appeared in my rearview mirror seemed like a new potential threat. My eyes nervously scanned the road, and every shadow or sudden movement made me jump. Even the familiar sound of my own car's engine now felt charged with terror. That trip, which was supposed to be a relief and a moment of rest, had turned into an endless psychological torment. The fear of being followed or eventually attacked kept haunting me with every mile I drove. That oppressive feeling of being watched just wouldn't leave me, and I constantly found myself looking over my shoulder, as if expecting the nightmare to repeat itself at any moment. In that state of constant vigilance and tension, every noise, every movement around me made my heart race. I felt like a prisoner of my own fear, unable to simply enjoy the trip and reach my destination in peace. The trauma from that threatening encounter at the rest stop seemed to have left scars that would take a long time to heal.